Stay hungry, stay foolish.
So now on the Innovation Show, it gives me great pleasure to welcome Don Tapscott, author of Wikinomics, The Digital Economy, Digital Capital, Growing Up Digital, The Naked Corporation, Radical Openness, and the Blockchain Revolution, most recently with his son Alex. Don is founder of the Blockchain Research Institute and most recently CarbonX. And in general, Don is well ahead of the game in technology, in global collaboration, and in blockchain. Welcome to the show, Don.
It's great to be here.
Really, really good to have you on the show. But Don, I'd love to talk about you a little bit first, because you were one of these people who was well ahead of the game, so far ahead of the game. Wikinomics was written in 2008. The idea of mass collaboration and the crowd working together well before anybody was actually doing anything about it. And you're there again with blockchain. But I'd love to talk about you and what drives you and what motivates you.
Well, I suppose I'm a very curious person, and I'm not a futurist. Fundamentally, I'm a researcher, and I like to get to the bottom of things. And I also give a damn about the world. I think the world it's too conflicted, it's too unequal, it's too unsustainable, and it's too unjust, and we have a lot of problems. And I have become convinced over the years, and I began in the 1970s, actually, at Bell Northern Research, Canada's Bell Labs, doing research on how multi-function workstations connected to networks might change things. And I have become convinced that this technology is the most important thing that's happening in terms of potential for change, mainly good, but also bad. So, it's been 4 decades as of next year, unbelievably, that I've been working on this. And I won't be doing another 4 decades, that's for sure. But there's so much to be done. And there's never been a more interesting or exciting time to be thinking about technology and business and society as we enter into a whole new paradigm.
And that paradigm, I mean, you were always thinking in that new paradigm, and it must have been frustrating, Don. I mean, you were out there preaching the changes that are required, the changes that are needed, both in big organizations, but also to the public. And a lot of that falls on deaf ears because of vested interest.
Well, vested interest in all kinds of things. I mean, my 1981 book, for close to a decade, people said I was wrong. And the main reason was that managers and professionals will never learn to type. Unbelievably, all these profundities about the transformation of the digital age were reduced to the question of keyboard efficiency. I became a typing evangelist. Typing is fun. You can learn to type. Use your own fingers. Secretaries' fingers don't count. I mean, so we have these big cultural legacies as well that are tough to change. That book sold about 7,000 copies, which in hindsight was a miracle. It even sold that many.
And Don, how do you? I mean, one of the things before we get to talk about your mindset and blockchain, etc., and your latest projects, it'd be great to understand how you keep yourself motivated and going despite all the roadblocks you must run into.
Well, God, these are tough questions. I haven't been asked before. Sometimes I think that being ahead of things is almost as bad as being wrong, because timing is so critical. I mean, I wrote another book in the mid-'80s that nobody read, and then I finally wrote Paradigm Shift. That was like 92, 93, and that was a big book. And then The Digital Economy, 94, 95, was a really big book. Well, they're both big. But then, 96, I wrote a book called Who Knows? Safeguarding Your Privacy in a Networked Age. And I co-authored that with a woman named Ann Kavukian. People just stared at me like, what are you talking about? What's the issue here? So, Digital Capital, you mentioned, that was a fantastic book. Business Week called that book Pure Enlightenment. It was the best review of a book I've ever seen in Business Week. But the book came out a month before NASDAQ crashed. So Timing is such a key issue, and sometimes it is frustrating when you think you're right about something and the world is just not ready to embrace that. I thought we might have been early, Alex and I, with blockchain revolution, but it turns out that the timing was pretty great on that one.
Yeah, and you deserve that. I mean, reading as I have so many of your books, and even Wikinomics was one of the first I came across, and there was so much in there that actually helped me in my own role because it gave me a new lens to look at things. Some of the ingredients you talked about, the ingredients of collaboration, openness on both sides, peering, sharing information, and open markets. People just struggle with those ideas because it's like, well, that's going right in the face of how we make money today. And now along comes the crash in 2008, and along comes blockchain, and there's this mass disruption en route. And I'd love, Don, your words on what blockchain is and what it's going to enable in the world.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, these ideas were sort of waiting for a technology that can enable this kind of transformation to occur. I mean, even the ideas of mass collaboration in Wikinomics, for sure, that brought about some big changes, not just with Wikipedia, but, we've now got pharmaceuticals placing clinical trial data in a commons, and there are fundamental changes taking place in every institution. Education, we're inexorably moving towards a new model of pedagogy, where students, rather than being passive recipients of somebody else's knowledge, sort of co-create and co-innovate, not just knowledge. What you know when you graduate isn't that important. It's sort of your capacity, really, to think critically and solve problems and research and collaborate and see the big picture and so on. But now, we are moving towards new models of pedagogy. But again, I mean, Wikinomics was a big book. It was the best-selling management book in the world for the whole year, according to Amazon. It was competing with the Black Swan. But again, in terms of fighting against old paradigms, I sat with Nicholas, the Black Swan author, at the FT Goldman Sachs Best Business Book of the Year Gala. So we're all sitting there in our black ties, and the CEO of Goldman Sachs is there and everything. And he was saying, you got this hands down. And I was saying, nah, Black Swan's going to win. And they gave it to an unknown book about investment banking. So it was like an out-of-body experience. Because one of us should have won, because those were two really important books. So anyway, it is what it is. You just keep working away, and eventually things do come around.
It's kind of ironic that it is, investing in banking that got in your way, because now you're ahead of the game and right on time, actually, it seems, with blockchain, and the banks and the middlemen are the ones in threat now, and they're the ones who will be coming to you for help.
Well, the irony was pretty extraordinary of a book on investment banking in early 2008 winning the award over the Black Swan and over Wikinomics. And then 6 months later, the core modus operandi of these institutions almost brought down our global capitalist system. I'm sure Nassim was, from the Black Swan, was shaking his head as well.
Yeah, frustrating times. But Don, it'd be great to hear from your mouth that, what blockchain is going to enable in the world, what we're going to see over the next, I don't know, hopefully sooner, but, over the next decade.
Well, for these 40 years, we've had the Internet of Information, and it's been great, but it is limited. Its impact overall is not profound. I mean, the deep structure and architecture of the corporation is still the same. We have changes in some industries, retail being an example of one that's been turned on its head. But overall, things pretty much work the way that they have. But the thing about information is that when I send you a copy, a PDF, a PowerPoint, even with a website, I keep the original. We've had this printing press, really. And that's been great. It's democratized information. But when it comes to value, assets, things that really matter to the economy, stocks, money, bonds, intellectual property, carbon credits, our identities, things like votes or cultural value like art or music. Sending a copy of those is a terrible idea. You don't want someone copying your vote or your identity. And if I send you $1,000, it's really important that I don't still have the money. Now, cryptographers have called this the double spend problem for a long time. And the way we manage that in our economy is through intermediaries, as you were saying. And banks, credit card companies, governments, now big social media companies, and they provide all of the business and transaction logic for every type of commerce. They identify the asset. Yep, that's really $1. They clear and settle transactions. They manage a situation, an election, and they keep records. Now, overall, they've done a pretty good job, but there are growing problems with these intermediaries. I mean, governments are at an all-time low on the trust scale. We have a crisis of legitimacy of our democratic institutions. We have, as I said, the banks almost brought down capitalism through their core modus operandi. And there are other problems. I mean, the financial industry excludes 2 billion people from the global economy. They add a lot of costs that shouldn't be there now. They slow things down. And the biggest problem is all these intermediaries are capturing our data. This is the new oil. We create this data, and they capture it. So the benefits of the digital age have been asymmetrical. And we have this crazy, unprecedented, at least in modern history, situation where we have wealth creation but declining prosperity. The economy is growing, the middle class is shrinking. So enter blockchain. Now, thank you to an anonymous person, Satoshi Nakamoto, he solved the double spend problem. So we now have a global ledger, an internet of value, a vast ledger where anything of value, ultimately from money to stocks to music to votes, can be managed, stored, transacted in a secure and private way. So this is a very revolutionary thing. I think the internet of value is going to be bigger than the internet of information. And it does challenge incumbents very fundamentally. It doesn't mean that intermediaries will go away, although disintermediation is absolutely a factor. You think about, you tap your card in a Starbucks and a bunch of messages go through half a dozen companies, each with their own counterparty risk, each at cost, each delaying things. 3 days later, a payment, a clearing and settlement, and then a payment occurs. Well, if that were on a ledger, a distributed ledger, there would be no 3-day settlement period because payment and settlement would be the same activity. And you wouldn't need all those counterparties either. So there is disintermediation and big disruption. But on the other hand, there are opportunities to re-intermediate, to create new value in the middle. And it may turn out these are bigger than the old middle. But the problem of paradigms that I pointed out back, almost 25 years ago now, is that leaders of old paradigms have difficulty embracing the new. So it's going to be very interesting to see who steps up and who doesn't.
And do you see, Don, the incumbents embracing blockchain? I mean, if they become the front end of blockchain, for example, the blockchain running the back ends, or do you see them being totally replaced?
Well, both. JP Morgan is a great case in point. I don't think there's anyone investing more in blockchain innovation than they do. But then you got the CEO, Jamie Morgan, saying Bitcoin is a fraud. Well, Bitcoin is a lot of things, but it's not a fraud. Shakespeare, he doth protest too much. I mean,
yeah.
And the idea of a cryptocurrency that's not controlled by a state or by a bank, because it's used to issue their own currencies and probably will in the future, are already doing so. That's a bit of a frightening concept. So, on the other hand, it's a reality. It's a new asset class. Bitcoin's worth over $100 million or $1 billion. So, JP Morgan is into the Bitcoin trading business as well. So this is, in psychological terms, called cognitive dissonance. You have these conflicting things that are happening in your head. But, Clay Christensen was right about the innovator's dilemma. If you don't actually find a way to cannibalize your own revenue, then somebody else does.
Isn't that the biggest challenge, though, Don? Like, you've been doing this for 4 decades, telling people there's another way, there's a new curve you need to look at. But how do you convince them? It seems like there's often needs to be a burning platform. Like we have PSD2 over here. There's a thing called GDPR over here that's actually going to, revolutionize privacy and data. And now you have blockchain coming down the line, and people are forced to make the change rather than change their own paradigm.
Yeah. Well, isn't it so? This was 1992. I wrote that a paradigm is a mental model, and they put boundaries around what we think. They constrain our actions. They're often based on assumptions that are so strong we don't know that they're there. And leaders of old paradigms have great difficulty embracing the new. And so this is really the big challenge of leadership in our time. And I'll tell you just an interesting observation. I don't know if I have a copy of it here. I'll go to my library. But I was asked to write the 20th anniversary edition of the digital economy. So I had to read the book again and see kind of what had occurred. And the book held up really well. The biggest shocker to me was that the book was very positive, but there was a dark side sort of section, all the things that could go wrong. And, we could have the destruction of our privacy. We could have a fragmentation of social discourse rather than the stuff bringing it together. We could have, growing, I called it, quote, severe bipolarization of wealth. Now, we could have, all kinds of, things like that. And every one of them, all 7 of them that I outlined in the book actually did occur. So, and then as an aside, I was looking at the book and I noticed all of the the endorsements that had been given for the original book, The Digital Economy. And half of the companies, there were like 20 of them, half of them are gone.
Yeah. That says Unbelievable.
Absolutely unbelievable.
And I'm
now,
sure
they didn't all go bankrupt, but they had various stages of getting themselves into trouble, or they were acquired by somebody or merged and so on. So anyway, it was sort of a sobering thing.
It is. And the fact that you called out those 7 points, and, most likely those leaders of those companies didn't listen, or they didn't shift their own paradigm, or like you say, like in the innovator's dilemma, look to what the next disruption is and actually cannibalize themselves, or at least run them concurrently.
Mm-hmm.
But Don, flip into the bright side of the force of what blockchain can do, because you touched on this about the huge portion of humanity who doesn't have access to banks and therefore are working in the dark ages, essentially, and how blockchain can revolutionize their world.
Well, this is a big problem. We have 2 billion people who are not part of the global economy. And in fairness to the banks, it's not just that they can't make money off these people. Most of them don't have an identity. Weirdly, a lot of them have a supercomputer in their pocket, and you can deliver financial services to them instantly with blockchain. It's fighting against old paradigms, in Kenya, against M-Pesa. But these are very powerful tools. Hernando de Soto, the Latin American economist, says that 70% of people who own land in the developing world have an unenforceable title. And he says this is more important than being banked, because if you can't have a valid title to your land, you can't borrow against it, you can't plan for the future, and so on. Well, you put land titles on a blockchain and no local clerk can be bribed to change that. There are all kinds of other really big sort of social issues like this having to do with poverty and inclusion, that blockchain can be a very powerful tool. This was the theme of my new TED Talk about blockchain and prosperity. And I haven't looked at that recently, but the last time I checked, there's 2.5 million people had seen that thing.
Yeah, no, seen it's fantastic.
Yeah. So anyway, these are big opportunities.
And you talked also about the likes of Imogen Heap, who I know is driving the music industry, and I know that's more a first world issue, but artists getting paid for the work, or even publications paying by the page or paying by the article, this can all be enabled by blockchain.
Well, yeah, when she posts a song on a blockchain platform, the song is inside a smart contract and it protects her intellectual property rights. You want to listen to it, maybe it's a few microcents, or maybe it's free. You want to put it in your movie, that's different. And the song specifies the right. It's like, what do you want to do? You make a theme song, you have somebody sing, you want background music, or it's going to be a ringtone on somebody's phone. I mean, and the way she describes it is the song acts as a business, sort of collecting money, protecting my rights, because the song has a lawyer and a bank account inside the song. So that's just one example of how there are all kinds of people who create value in our economy, but that aren't fairly compensated. And the Internet of Information actually not only didn't help with this, it broke a lot of our IP regime. So we didn't have a native digital medium for value. That's what a song is. It's an asset owned by somebody. So all we had was a medium for information. So we treated the song like it was information, and we copied it and published it. Well, the upshot of that is if you were a songwriter 35 years ago, you wrote a platinum song, sold 1 million copies, you get $46,000 in royalties. Today, 1 million copies. Today, you get 1 million streams, and you don't get $46,000. You get $35. So we can fix this now if we're smart, if we use this technology effectively.
And talking about smarts, Don, governments seem to be so far away from this. And it's like AI, for example, that there's a whole AI revolution going on as well. And there's no government taking this by the scruff of the neck and actually controlling it or regulating it. What's your feeling on blockchain and governments?
Well, governments, of course, can be huge beneficiaries in a number of ways. This technology can bring about some profound changes in the architecture of government. I think it can open up governments, enabling a new division of labor in society about how we create public value. We wrote about that in Blockchain Revolution. It can help us solve the crisis of legitimacy of democracy. Young people aren't voting. More and more agree with the bumper sticker, don't vote. It only encourages them, which is a problem. Politicians are beholden to their wealthy funders, not to the electorate. Well, we can now have smart votes that have smart contracts associated with them, where politicians need to be beholden to the people who elected them. Governments can also benefit in terms of central banks. Alex, just yesterday, was speaking at a huge conference in the Mideast of the central bankers and ministers of finance from a whole bunch of countries in sort of that region and in Asia. And I was just talking to him. He said the reaction was pretty extraordinary. This excitement about creating a cryptocurrency for your nation state, moving moving the euro or moving the dollar or the pound to a blockchain. The benefits of that could be huge. But again, leaders of old paradigms have difficulty embracing the new. So governments they don't understand this stuff. There's still lots of people who think that this is all about, criminals. Of course, criminals always use every new technology before anybody else. They're the most effective.
Absolutely.
Flip the car, the flip phone, you name it.
Yeah.
But and of course, some smart law enforcement agencies understand that this is a real boon to them because they can use metadata to track criminal activity. But then, like China, I did an interview recently with a big business magazine there. And they said, well, our government says we need to protect our fiat currency. Well, no, you don't. I'd be shocked if Bitcoin was more than 1% of all transactions in China ever. They should be doing the opposite, embrace this technology and build a fiat currency on a blockchain. So leaders of old had difficulties embracing the new. Korea is struggling with, should we ban ICOs? Well, the answer is no. You're a surgeon. Get out your scalpel. Don't use a chainsaw in the operating room because a lot of crap's going to fly around. And you're going to injure a lot of people. If it's a security, and some tokens are, then it should fall under securities legislation. If it looks like a duck, walks like a duck, and quacks like a duck, it's probably a duck. And you should treat it like a duck. But if it looks like a dolphin, or a small motor vehicle, don't treat it like a duck. It takes time, for people to understand the power of what's happening here and the opportunity.
It reestablishes trust, doesn't it? It's where trust is missing, and there was a need for an intermediary. Now we have an impartial intermediary, which is technology.
Well, that's true. Trust is not achieved by a middleman. It's achieved by cryptography and by collaboration and by some clever code. But it doesn't. But intermediaries can use this to build more trusted institutions. That's the irony of governments, being resistant to this technology.
And Don, last question is your current work with the Blockchain Research Institute. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, there are lots of organizations. Every company, smart company that's big, is experimenting. They're doing pilots. They're members of important consortia like Hyperledger, the Enterprise Ethereum Foundation, or R3. But no one has really tackled the big strategic issues about this technology. How does it change industries? How does it change the way we manage companies, the functions of the C-suite, CMO, CFO, CIO, Chief Legal Officer, Head of Supply Chain, and so on? And then there are all kinds of really big, tough issues: the Internet of Things, tokenization, smart contracts, you name it. So over the years, I've conducted a number of these large, I call them syndicated research projects. You get 20 to 40 companies. They each kick in a couple $100,000. You have millions of dollars. You can hire on a contract basis all the smartest people to look into stuff. So our project on tokenization is being led by Michael Casey, who wrote the book, co-authored The Age of Cryptocurrencies. Our project on smart contracts is led by Nick Szabo, who invented the idea in 1996. His paper, we just released it yesterday to our members, is the most important document ever written about smart contracts. That's my opinion.
Yeah.
So all these members are getting millions of dollars worth of IP. And the cool thing about this, for people who don't have 200K, or 150 if you're a non-tech and non-financial company, is that each of these projects, 6 months after they've been issued to our members, will be released to the public on a Creative Commons license.
Wow.
So in 6 months minus 1 day, that from today, Nick Szabo's paper will be made public. And that's going to be a really big deal. And this will be the rising tide that lifts all boats. I think it's going to help bring a lot of clarity to the market and break a lot of log jams. But if anybody's listening and they're from a big company or a blockchain pioneer, they should contact us, info@blockchainresearchinstitute.org, or tweet me at @dtapscott, and we can give you some information about how to get involved.
Phenomenal, Don. Phenomenal. And thank you so much for your time. And you're a credit to yourself. You live your values. What you write, you live. And we wish you the very, very best. Don Tapscott, founder of Blockchain Research Institute, author of a plethora of books, which I'll list on this interview, and most recently, Carbon X. Thanks for joining us, Don.
Okay. My pleasure, Aidan.